Greetings, one and all, and welcome back to the 1904 Club, the Hull City podcast, of course, from the Hull Daily Mail. And this week, because it's half term, we've managed to get rid of Prots. Fletch is lost in a cupboard somewhere, and Burns is out playing golf. So it's just me and Kathryn today. Kathryn, how the devil are you?
I'm not bad, thank you, Baz. After spending spending 2 weeks in court, but that sounds like I was up in court. I was just covering a court case. So,
Burns didn't actually say that you were in court last week, so you need to clarify why you're in court.
God, it wasn't me on the witness stand, thankfully. I was just reporting on a case, and it was meant to take 4 days, and it ended up taking 7. So the wheels of justice move slowly, especially when they take about 5 breaks a day. But then I heard Prutz wasn't coming today, so I thought maybe I'll have to come back in.
Yeah, Prutz is off on his holidays. He's got. We're all dealing with February half term. I can't believe how quickly it's come around. But yeah, he's off. He's off to the Yorkshire coast, bless him. So if you see him knocking around, throw something at him. I don't know, an ice cream or some candy floss, and then just run away laughing. Before we start, I saw a tweet this morning from Tiger Tube, one of the great City accounts. It's 365 days, according to Tiger Tube, since the 3-2 win at Huddersfield Town last season, which was absolutely incredible. City were winning 1-0 from early on when Greavesy scored, and then conspired to control the game, familiar theme of last season. Didn't get the second goal. Where have we heard that before? And then conspired to go 2-1 down, and then miraculously come back and win the game. It was just an astonishing end to the game. And when Greavesy headed in, I think one of Abdouch's 3 assists, Abdouch's cross, and Greavesy, that away end must have been just sensational. What a moment, Kathryn. It was incredible, wasn't it?
It was, and partly because Jacob Greaves hardly ever scored, so it was just the most unlikely person to somehow pop up with a winning goal right at the end of the game. But it just sounded a little bit like watching Hull City this season in terms of going ahead and then letting it slip and not quite taking the chances. And unfortunately, this season, obviously, we've not come up with too many late winners, but it makes me a bit nostalgic. I miss Jacob Greaves now and thinking about him. Obviously, we kind of hope he stays up in the Premier League with Ipswich, but he could be coming back down next season, depending on what happens with them.
Yeah, I said conspired to lose it. Of course, they didn't, because Huddersfield equalised late on to make it 1-1, and then Greavesy went up the other end and scored that goal. But it came in that amazing week, didn't it? When we won at Rotherham, obviously Jadon's Rabona. We then won at Huddersfield, and then went to Southampton and completely tore them to pieces. So I don't want to get too bogged down in how wonderful was that week. But it was easily the best week of Hull City season. The best week, of Hull City's 2024 on the pitch. Let's talk about Matty's pressing then. A draw at home to Norwich. And I think it's one of those, isn't it? Everybody's frustrated that it's another home game that they've not won. It's another game where they've gone in front and been unable to kick on and go and win the game. But I've got to be honest, I don't know how you feel, Kathryn, but I actually feel a bit more positive about City at home now. I'm looking at they're at the bottom 3. They're not massive. They're only a point clear, but Derby was smashed at the weekend. No immediate John Eustace bounce. Plymouth were beaten again. At Luton again, beaten. I just feel a bit like I was encouraged. Yeah, okay, Norwich dominated the ball, and City again didn't win the game, but they didn't lose it. And sometimes I do think at this level, particularly when you go so long without winning a game at home, maybe just getting a point on the board, a line in the sand, gives them a platform to build on. What do you think?
Yeah, I think at the time you're always a bit more frustrated in the kind of hours and maybe the first day after a game when you've gone in front and not kind of held on to a lead. And because obviously the fact that we were so desperate to win at home. But I think maybe a couple of days after, when you start to reflect on it, you realise every point matters when you're in a relegation battle. And Norwich are a difficult team. They're quite inconsistent, but they can cause a lot of teams problems. They've got some good players. They did hit the post, obviously. They could have quite easily, earlier in the season, we might have lost that game. And that would have been a lot worse. So as much as, we're desperate for them to finally kind of pick up 3 points at home, like I say, getting points to the board sometimes can just make a difference. And even though it's only 1 point more than Derby, the fact that we actually went out of the bottom three without doing anything on Friday night because, you know, Derby's goal difference took a battering, and to then get a point, it just feels like sometimes the goal difference can make it feel like an extra point, even though it's very close. But like I say, sometimes you just want to make sure you don't lose and try and build on it, and hopefully it turns out to be a point gained rather than 2 dropped.
Well, the goal difference is important because, as you say, when push comes to shove on the 4th or 5th of May, whenever it is, it might be a factor. And you look at Luton's -22, Plymouth's -32, Derby's is -13, City's is -11, Cardiff -19, Stoke -9, and then you're going up to Portsmouth, Swansea, and Oxford, very, very similar to Hull City's. But that is it. Okay, Derby's is very tight, and you know Derby defensively have been okay this season, and not dissimilar to City, have struggled for goals. But what I would say about the Norwich thing as well, you know, Norwich are only second to Leeds in terms of top scorers. I know Leeds are well away with 60 odd, but Norwich 51 goals now, which is one more than Middlesbrough. So they are the second top scorers in the league. You know, they've had a couple of dodgy results before that, but they've still got very, very good players in you know, Sainz with 15 goals as the Championship's top scorer. Josh Sargent, you know, I think that was his 5th successive game of scoring against the Tigers. You know, he's in good form. You know, those 2 players are better than anything Hull City have got, aren't they? Let's be fair. Those 2, you know, you would rather have Sainz and Sargent walk straight into that Hull City team, don't they?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I saw a stat saying about Josh Sargent in terms of the goals he scored in the Championship for one club, potentially being the most of anyone in the division, obviously from kind of previous seasons. I was trying to get a replay of the goal after the game to see the squirrel, and a lot of Americans were kind of tweeting about Josh Sargent, so I think that's kind of where I saw that stat come up. But yeah, him and Sainz, even remember the away game earlier this season. Obviously, City were in kind of probably a worse place than they are now. But they tore us to shreds at Carrow Road, and Sainz in particular was brilliant that day. And going forward, Norwich, they are really, really good. It's obviously defensively where sometimes they let themselves down. But like I say, they had the chances to win that game, and perhaps reflecting on it, keeping them to just the 1 goal isn't particularly too bad when you think about the kind of, I don't want to say makeshift defence, but I feel like sometimes it does feel like a bit of a makeshift defence when you've got a left-sided centre-back at left-back, but and some injuries as well. So let's I think, yeah, like we say, hopefully it's a point gained rather than 2 drops.
Well, the funny thing about the Norwich game at Carrow Road, I think back to that for many reasons, actually. But it came on the back of what was arguably City's best week of the season, because they'd beaten Stoke, they'd thumped Cardiff. Although it was a thumping, Cardiff will say we had some chances in that game. It finished 4-1, but that, and obviously then they went to QPR and won 3-1 as well. And then they went to Norwich, got tonked 4-0, and then we went head first into the break. But even in that game, as much as Norwich would just playing a game of football a level above anything City could do on that day, but they still had. I remember Bedia had a chance in the first half, a really key moment. He headed. I can't remember if he headed wide or if he headed at Angus Gunn, but he didn't score. Obviously, Bellumi had a great chance. Then João Pedro had it when he came on, had a goal disallowed. But Norwich, look, going forward, the stats back it up that they are one of the best teams in the league. And I think sometimes, like I say, as inherently frustrated everybody would have been leaving the ground on Saturday, and there was a good crowd in over 22,000, would have been frustrated. But sometimes when you're in City's predicament, you just go, yeah, okay, we'll take the point. And as you said before, they have lost that game earlier in the season. You know, you've only got to look back to QPR. I know they didn't go 1-0 up in that game, but they lost 2-1. Obviously, the Stoke game, they did go 1-0 up and lost 2-1. The Middlesbrough game, they were more than in the game and conceded a shocker and lost it 1-0. The Watford game, they were 1-0 up, didn't kick on, ended up drawing. So many times that we've seen that play out, and at least they hung in there and they got something out of it. You just never know, do you, that how crucial that point will be in the grand scheme of things. But it is a point on the board, and it gives, when you look at the games coming up, particularly the next home game, which we now know is going to be Plymouth on the 4th of March, it gives them, well, it doesn't change the narrative about them not winning at home. At least it's stopped that rot of defeats, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And again, Plymouth are quite an inconsistent team. Obviously, there's a reason they're in the bottom three, but they obviously went and got a kind of fantastic result against Millwall, and then they can't back it up. A little bit like City, but they have closed the gap on us now, and that game does feel. I think for a while people have maybe written Plymouth off and that they were probably just going to go down, and they're very much in with a chance of potentially getting themselves out of relegation if they can build up a bit of form. So suddenly this game feels a little bit more kind of, not that it would have always been a big game, but it somehow feels a little bit more now we're playing a proper relegation rival. And those are the types of games that make me really nervous. It's one that City have got. That's the home game you've got to win. Plymouth at home. You can take a point against Norwich, but Plymouth at home is the one you want to get 3 points from.
On the subject of Plymouth, what impact do you think playing away at Manchester City in the FA Cup at 5:45 on the Saturday impacts them? So obviously, long journey up to Manchester. Who knows how that's going to play out? They could win. They could get tonked 7-0. Then obviously back to Devon, and then effectively a few hours later, they're going to be back up to East Yorkshire. I know that Plymouth wanted that game. They didn't want the game being played on that Tuesday. Obviously, they wanted it delayed further back. I think City were quite happy for it to be played on that Tuesday. The EFL were like, well, this is the next available date, so we want the game played. So can that have any impact on that game, do you think, given whatever happens at Man City? And it's obviously a big occasion. There'll be a lot of emotion used and all that sort of stuff from the Plymouth players, irrespective of how the game plays out.
Well, you'd think they'd play a strong team given the fact they've beaten Liverpool in the previous round and they're going to Man City, they're on TV. The manager that's come in at Plymouth, he's quite like he's the type of person that comes across quite well on TV, and I'm sure he'll want his team to give a good account of themselves. He won't want them to go there and get thrashed 6 or 7-0. So obviously the Liverpool team they played was obviously not Liverpool's first team, whereas I'm expecting Pep to probably play quite a strong Man City team because it might be the only trophy they can win this season. So hopefully for City, it ends up being, for Hull City, it ends up being that Man City get a big win over them and maybe make them kind of run all over the pitch for 90 minutes. In fact, maybe Man City could win an extra time and then they have to play an extra 20 minutes of football and maybe even win on penalties just to kind of rub salt into the wounds. But like I say, I can understand why Plymouth wouldn't want to then come up to Hull on the Tuesday, but not our problem, is it?
No, absolutely. Just on that subject as well, before we move away from Plymouth, what a game. And I'm conscious that managers are very much, it's about us. But when you look at, before they come to Hull City, they play away at Luton this Wednesday night, and then they play at home to Cardiff at 12:30 on Saturday. They are, in their own context of their own season, those are two mammoth games for Plymouth, for Luton, also for Cardiff, but for Hull City as well. Everybody will be looking at what happens on Wednesday night at Kenilworth Road, and then again at Home Park in the early kickoff. Obviously, we're early kickoff at Sunderland on Saturday as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think the relegation teams, like Plymouth, playing all three of us. I mean, if they don't pick up any points in that, you'd almost kind of say, see you later, that's you probably done, even though mathematically it probably wouldn't be, but you would think maybe psychologically, if you're not picking up points against the teams around you, then that's a big problem. And it's the same for City, it's the same for Cardiff. You've got to be taking the 3 points against the teams that are in and around you, not just for getting points on the board, but I think psychologically as well. Sometimes even though losing a game against a relegation rival, it doesn't mean you're relegated that night. Sometimes you can think back, if you do end up going that way, you think back to the games of where it all went wrong, and it's probably those games that you've lost against the teams around you.
Absolutely. They've got Ryan Hardy, their top goal scorer, picked up an injury on in their defeat at Blackburn on Saturday as well, and there's a concern that he might be missing a period of time. So before we'll come back a bit later on to the picture at the bottom of the table and where things are with City's upcoming games. You touched on the left back situation, and and it's obviously something that we've talked long and hard about on this podcast, and has been a conversation amongst City fans in the bars, the pubs, in the stadium, on the concourse for quite a while now. How concerned are you that the club didn't bring in left back cover once Ryan Giles departed for Middlesbrough?
Yeah, I was surprised. I know they were trying, and I'm not saying that it was kind of overlooked. I'm sure they were trying to bring somebody in, but I think that was probably a more important position than some of the ones we did strengthen. We knew we needed forwards, and we brought plenty of attacking players in. But it felt like we made a lot of signings in January, and one of the key positions we needed was whether it was left back was the most important. But even if we brought in somebody at right back, to just have a few more options that you could maybe have shifted a Louis Coyle to left back if you needed to, although that's kind of not ideal either. And I don't know if left backs are just in short supply all over, throughout the division, but it seems to have been a position for a while now that we've struggled to really have anyone kind of cement it and make it their own. And we've seen people come in and out of that position, and nobody's managed to kind of keep that place and keep that shirt there. We've kind of hoped that maybe Matty Jacob could take it on, but it's obviously maybe still slightly too early for him, and he still lacks that consistency. And then you end up when you're in a situation where you've got Sean McLaughlin kind of having to play there because he's shown he's the most steady option of the ones that we've got, but he's still not a left back. You can still tell when he's playing there that he is a centre back at left back. And when, as I kind of said it, earlier in the season, when he comes up against the best wingers in the league, I think that is where he will struggle. We saw it against Burnley. Listen, he played fantastically against Sheffield United, and I think he was player of the match. And he will have those performances where he's really kind of on top of his game. But unfortunately, I do think he's still got those performances in him. Sometimes we saw it when he was at centre back as well, where he might just make a mistake or he might just switch off for a minute, and it can cost you a goal. And as much as I really do like him, like I say, it's just not it's not his first position. And unfortunately, Cody Drama and Louis Coyle are both right backs, and in the same vein, neither of them have been perfect at right back either. So if you switch them over to the left, it's kind of even, they're even more out of position than sometimes they are when they're playing at right back. So it's not an ideal situation. I think maybe you just have to stick with Sean McLaughlin there and hope that the consistency comes the more he plays in that role. Because I do think chopping and changing every week is also not the most helpful. And if you were to say it's a choice between McLaughlin, Jacob and Drame, I don't know, I'd maybe lean more towards McLaughlin because he's maybe slightly more defensive minded, but obviously the other two are naturally more full-backs. But like I say, it's just not an ideal situation to be in.
No, I think it's worth reiterating that they left back was an area they tried to strengthen. Unfortunately, Ruben. And look, I guess this is one of those things, isn't it? Excuse me. There's the case that you want the manager to have a big involvement in transfers. Well, he did because, they looked at other options. He wanted Charlie Taylor from Southampton, but Charlie Taylor went cold and they didn't hear from him. And Ruben basically made it. They looked at a lot of different options of players available that they could bring in on that side. And obviously, Ruben's looked at all the data. He's done his research in conjunction with the recruitment staff, and he's gone, Charlie Taylor is the player I want. If I can't get that, I don't believe the options out there are any better than what we've got. And fans will have their own opinion, but that the manager ultimately said, because they looked at Murray Wallace from Millwall, experienced left back in the Championship, played an awful lot of games. He was a player they looked at and could have brought in, but the manager said, I don't believe that he, and anybody else for that matter, is any better than what I've got with Sean McLaughlin, with Matty Jacob, and if I need to, put a square peg in a very round hole, Louis Coyle or Cody Drame. Obviously, Brandon Fleming's now gone off to Forest Green. He was never really in the picture. I mean, he was training with the 21s. There was a thought process that if he was to stay around, that he could be back up. If needed, but obviously now he's gone out to the National League where there's no transfer. The window, it doesn't apply to them like it did in the Football League. So he's now gone to Forest Green and he's out of contract in the summer. So that's probably Brandon. You did have we were chatting before. You had a left field idea, didn't you, for left back?
Yeah, well, I'd heard that Lincoln, not that we've seen him or kind of in a City shirt apart from the announcement video, had previously played left wing back at some point in his career. When I was just saying to you earlier, as any other options that we could play there, and I did have wondered whether a back five might suit us, just because defensively we have been suspect, and that's been the area of weakness at times. Whether actually having a five at the back and an extra centre back could maybe help us, especially if Charlie Hughes is coming back, him on the ball could sort of bring it out of play a little bit. And I thought, well, if Lincoln could play left wing back, that might potentially solve all our problems, but it might solve one of them.
Well, and he's played 8 times in his career at left back. He's scored once and he's got 4 assists. So that's, at any level of football, that's not bad going, is it? To be fair, to be playing to have played eight times there in your life and you've got 4 assists and a goal. I mean, that's not bad going. But he does exist. We thought he was going to be. He was out injured and not involved in the Burnley game. He was back fit and available for selection against Norwich, but obviously wasn't. But you've got the thing is with Lincoln, you've got a lot of options now in that kind of front third of the pitch. When you look at the bench, there's a lot of strength on the bench. And he's a player that just hasn't played in eons. And it is, as we've said before, it's always a risk particularly when you're signing players from Turkey, the time it takes to adjust, the physicality, the intensity. It generally takes them a long time to get to grips with what English football and particularly the Championship is like. So, he's going to have to be drip fed into it at some point. Hopefully, we do see him because we don't know what. The manager likes him. He said he's a very talented player. He's obviously played for Fenerbahce. He's clearly got something. Whether he's got enough to be a success in the Championship relegation battle, I'm sceptical personally. But you have to give the kid a fair crack, and we'll see. But maybe the 3 at the back thing is something that we were talking about before the game on Saturday. Is that in Burns' Burns has banged the drum for that for months about going to a back 3. Particularly now you've got John Egan, who was not brought up on it, but his success at Sheffield United was based around playing in a back 3. Do City have the players though away from Egan? And would that mid-season change? Would that be something? Could it work? Do you think?
Well, it would work when you've got the options. I mean, at the minute, it depends how quickly Charlie Hughes and potentially Finn Burns come back. Because if they were fit, I would think they would probably be playing in it. But right now, with the options we had on Saturday, for example, it would have meant McLaughlin shifting in to the left centre back, and then either playing Matty Jacob or, as we say, Drame at left wing back. The problem I have with the centre backs is, and you have this in the back 4 as well, none of them are particularly quick. I feel like Burns is maybe the quickest of the ones that we have, and Charlie Hughes might be a little bit quicker than John Egan and Alfie Jones. But sometimes actually that can help if you've got an extra centre back there, and then you've got the wing backs to kind of come round and cover as well. It just seems like it might give us a bit more protection. And when you think about the amount of goals we've conceded from crosses into the box, I mean, it was the same on Saturday. It was cross into the box, free header, Sargent had a free run. And I just wonder whether having an extra body in there just might give the defence a little bit more protection, a little bit more help. And the fact that John Egan knows the system really well is helpful. And you'd think footballers are adaptable. I'm sure, you'd think they've played different systems. They might try them out in training. It's not like you're asking them to, it's not like Tim Volter, sending the centre backs up to number 10. I feel like if they were trying to get their heads around that, surely just playing 5 at the back isn't too difficult for them to manage. So I'd be interested to see them try it. Whether it's something they try at Sunderland against a team, much higher up the table potentially, or whether that you're setting yourself up for failure there by trying a completely new system. But sometimes I think when you're going away from home against a team you're not expected to get anything from, you might as well give it a go. But obviously it depends who's available for that game on Saturday.
And that's the frustrating thing, isn't it? And I know it's the Championship, so players, the reason they're playing in the Championship is because they're not consistent enough to play in the Premier League, and et cetera, et cetera. But that's the last 2 goals City have conceded have been crosses from that side into the box. Now, obviously, the cross the other at Burnley, we know that Kamara should have done better. Should have tried to block the cross, and then Fleming got the running on McLaughlin to power the header in. Obviously, on Saturday, the cross came in. We didn't stop the cross, and then Sargent gets the run on Alfie Jones and Glance. I mean, sometimes, and Jones is getting a lot of stick for it, and I understand that. Sometimes you do also have to tip your hat to the striker and say, look, credit the striker for making the run. He got the run and he finished it. That's the rub, isn't it? Generally, to score a goal, somebody has to make a mistake, whatever level of football you're at. And I think, but the goals, the frequency of which the goals are coming, and that stopping the cross is inherently frustrating, isn't it? And that is something they need to look at. And maybe going free at the back and playing a wing back, it can help. Maybe on the flip side, maybe it unsettles the team further up. You could play. Could you get Joseph and Pedro in the team together? If you go in like a kind of a 3-5-2 almost, would that work? Because that's the other thing. I thought at times on Saturday, Pedro was terrifically isolated. And that's something we've seen so many times this season, that the striker just becomes completely isolated. And then, the ball goes up, doesn't stick, and it comes back, and you sink deeper into, as we saw on Saturday, you sink deeper and deeper and deeper. You lose that. You can't regain the ball. You turn it over very quickly, and there's no control in the game. Maybe getting that second striker up there, maybe getting Carl Joseph playing off or closer to Pedro. Is that something you could see working?
I think the type of player that Pedro is, like you say, I think he could actually benefit from having someone a little bit closer to him. You think about maybe him sort of winning some flick-ons and Joseph kind of being in and around there to pick up the loose balls. We've not really seen the pair of them kind of interact much, in the same team. It tends to be, one or the other. And I can kind of see maybe, if we're playing the same system, I imagine Joseph might come back into the team on Saturday for Pedro to sort of try and do the job that he was doing at Burnley when chasing around a lot. But I would actually quite like to see them play a little bit more together, and whether that could work in a slightly different system, I guess remains to be seen. But I mean, I don't know if the players up front, we scored 3 goals at Sheffield United, but across the season are doing enough to justify keeping the system, to suit them. Equally, when you've got 5 at the back and 3 centre backs, like I say, if Charlie Hughes was to come back into the team, we know he is very good on the ball and he's a very good passer of the ball. And a little bit like how Harry Maguire used to do it, for City back in the day, kind of stepping out and maybe bringing the ball out of defence. He almost then comes into the midfield slightly a little bit as well. Because I think, bar kind of Stephen Alzate, who's been, the most consistent midfielder, I think that midfield changes quite a lot because of inconsistency. I mean, I thought the midfield was really, really poor against Burnley, obviously better against Norwich, and Matt Crooks was, better against Norwich, but, him and Matozo were really quite poor against Burnley. Again, playing against a very good team that are, in the promotion places, but that was, they'd had a lot of time to prepare for that game. And that was kind of one of the areas, as much as, the defence were under pressure, I don't think they got any help from the midfield at all. So potentially, a change of formation, change of personnel. You never know. I mean, I'm not a football manager, so I'm sure Ruben Sellers might be, if he ever listens, might think, don't know what you're talking about. But I just wonder sometimes, whether a change might help.
Is that part of the problem as well, that you look at the defence is largely settled? I know he's brought in Egan, but generally it looks like it's going to be Coyle at right back, it's going to be McLaughlin at left back, Jones and possibly Egan. Just before on you touched on it there about the injuries. Well, you've got Burns, Hughes and Palmer. They're expecting Burns back and Palmer back in training. Sorry, Burns and Hughes back in training towards the end of this week. I mean, they have Ruben seems to talk about a kind of a 3 to 4 day rule where they need to have trained fully for 3 to 4 days before they can be considered for a first team place. So I would suspect that Sunderland is probably too soon for either of those. There's a hope that Palmer can be back in training at the back end of this week. From what Ruben said, probably more likely early next week, but we'll see how this week plays out. I would suspect that Sunderland is going to be too early for those three. But they have got 4 games in the next couple of weeks. It would be interesting to see if we do see Charlie Hughes and Finn Burns back in the squad away at Cardiff next Tuesday. Now, if you've not seen that, it was originally the Saturday, but it's last Saturday or early Saturday, but it's been moved. It was moved to next Wednesday, but because of Cardiff's away cup tie at Aston Villa on the Friday night, it's now gone back to Tuesday night. Anyway, in terms of the midfield, Kathryn, is Ruben struggling for a unit that he can find success with? Because that is the area of the team generally that changes quite a lot. We've had, Regan was out at Burnley. Matazo's been in. Obviously, we've not seen Gustavo Puerta for 2 games, and that's generating plenty of conspiracy theories on social media, and people claiming that he's not being played because of this clause. We'll come to that in a little while. But it feels to me that he's scratching around trying to find a midfield unit in that engine room that he can trust and to control games, because they didn't control, as you said, that unit he went with at Burnley was non-existent. It started well on Saturday against Norwich, but then it faded and they lost, in the second half of the first half, they lost control of the game. And the midfield wasn't getting the ball. It wasn't keeping the ball. It feels like, as I say, he's scratching around. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And obviously it worked at Sheffield United pretty well, but I think we've kind of struggled since then to, like you say, to kind of have this consistent midfield. And it's only really Alzate who keeps his place, who's definitely, one of the first names on the team sheet. And we know you can always expect a kind of minimum 6 out of 10 from him, and that he's kind of going to be consistent. And then the players around him, which probably doesn't help him either, that they're constantly changing and you don't know from week to week who's going to be in, and the different kind of system that it's going to be. I just think he's, like you say, I think he is struggling to kind of find what works best. And listen, sometimes you have different midfields for different oppositions because, different oppositions bring different threats. But I don't think he's quite worked out what his best midfield option is, and potentially what his best 11 is either. But I think we just need a little bit more consistency from the players that are coming in. I think Matt Crooks tends to be probably going to be in there with Alzate. I think maybe he's kind of taken himself into potentially being more often than not a starter. And then it's kind of a case of who joins him, whether it's Slater, whether it's Puerta, whether it's Matozo. I mean, one of them, it's a little bit like the left back situation. You just want somebody to kind of come in and just take hold of that shirt. But I feel a little bit sorry for Alzate that he's just kind of in there, and week to week he doesn't know who's going to be playing alongside him.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's horses for courses, but I sometimes think you can have a different setup to at home to what you play away. And I know Ruben is very much, we play the same whether we go away or at home, and Liam was the same before that. But, I personally think Regan gets a bit of a raw deal at times. I actually think they missed his energy and his drive at Burnley. And he's a midfielder that's got the ability to get into the penalty box. Yes, we know he doesn't score enough goals. Yes, we know he misses a lot of chances, and he had a really good one on Saturday that he probably should have done better with in that second half when he fired straight at the goalkeeper. But he caught it well, but anyway. So I think Regan gets a bit of a raw deal. I think sometimes he becomes a bit of an easy scapegoat for me. Matazo was awful at Burnley, but I thought he looked really bright when he came on second half again. We have to bear in mind he's a young player, he's a new player, still getting to grips with life in the Championship, life in Hull. The move happened very quickly last month, so we have to factor in those things. And he's also coming to a team that are struggling. Let's be fair. The Puerta thing. Is there sometimes a case, Kathryn, that players, and I'm not saying this is the situation, but I'm just playing devil's advocate, that a player, when results aren't going particularly well and you're not winning games, that a player out of the team becomes better than the ones in it, because we had this last season with players that were taken out of the team. You have a couple of dodgy results, suddenly those players that the fans were calling to get out of the team or weren't bringing enough suddenly want them back in the team. I'm not saying that is the case with Puerta at all. I'm not saying that the fans were calling for him to be dropped, because that wasn't the case. But is that a thing that sometimes that the player out of the team becomes better when they're not in the team?
Yeah, I think so, potentially. It's potentially similar with Casey Palmer. I mean, I don't think he's ever been consistent when he's played. I think he always works really hard and offers the team something different, but we've not seen him for a while. It's kind of like, well, it's a good player to kind of come back into the team, but you know, he was never 100% consistent kind of before when he was playing. So the same with Puerta. I think as good as he has been when he's been at his best, I think he has had games where he's been kind of anonymous as well. I think most players in that midfield category have all had times where they've been good, and have all had times when they've been, you know, really bad. And it's a strange situation with Puerta, what's going on, and why he's not playing, and why he's kind of not getting a look in. But like you said, I'm not sure he's the answer to all the problems. Sometimes you think, you know, when things aren't going well, you want to see him kind of come back into the team. And I do think he is a really good player on his day, and he offers something different if he can find that consistency. But I mean, you probably know better than kind of me and everyone else as to why he maybe isn't playing, and you know what kind of the situation is with him.
Yeah, look, you speak to different people. I've spoken to the manager about it at length. I've spoken to other people at the club. I've spoken to the owner about it. And you know, the manager said himself on Friday that, you know, Puerta, he likes him, he rates him. He's been unfortunate. He said by his own admission, he's been unfortunate that they've signed a lot of players, and he has to look at these other players. You know, he has to look at Crooks, and you know, Crooks has been up and down, but he has scored 2 goals in the last couple of games. So, you know, he's got to look at Matazo. He also has to look at Alzate. He's got to look. You know, he likes Slater, and let's point out, every manager that's ever been here since Regan has played Regan Slater. So there might be a few fans that hammer him, but there's, you know, football managers at this football club like him. So they're obviously seeing something from him on a match day and in training. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily anything that Puerta's done specifically to be out of the team, but he has to look at these other players as well, and he's got to try and find that right formula. And Puerta, you know, is a talented player, but there's a reason that Bayer Leverkusen have sent him to Hull City at the bottom of the Championship. Well, in the Championship, they weren't bottom, of course, in the summer, but that no teams further up the food chain have got him. So, you know, he's inconsistent. He's a talented player, but he's inconsistent. Now, coming back to what I was just going to say, you know, I've spoken to a lot of people at the club, and there is genuinely here, and you can take it at face value. You can think I'm being fed a pack of lies that you know, there's no ulterior motive or whatever, and that's fine. That's whatever. But I can only go on the various people I'm speaking to, and they are. And I said, you know, we always get criticised in journalism for not naming our sources. Well, people at the club, the manager, and the owner, there you go, have all said it's nothing to do with the clause. We if we want to buy him, we will buy him, and we can buy him. And you know, it's nothing to do with paying. I think the figure I was given is €3 million is what they've got to the magic figure in terms of games played is nowhere near. He's nowhere near hitting that yet. I think he's another 7 or 8 games at least away from even getting near that. So you know, I genuinely don't believe that Ruben, and call me stupid, call me naive, all those things, I genuinely don't believe sitting here today that Ruben Sayers is not picking Gustavo Puerta for fear of the club having to pay a couple of £1 million to Leverkusen. I don't believe that is the case. And I genuinely just think, don't forget, this is the manager sees the player in training, the manager sees the player's response to being taken out of the team and not playing. So, you know, it's very easy to cast aspersions and go, well, he's not being picked. He's the best player we've got. He's not being picked because we've got to pay £2 million. Fine, but I just don't see that as the situation. I don't think Puerta is bringing him back on is going to suddenly, you know, turn Hull City into a team that are going to get in the playoffs. I think there's much more. I think it's more nuanced than that. And as I say, the manager sees the player in training. He also sees the other players in training, and he picks a team based on what he feels is the strongest possibility of going to wherever and getting a result. And it may be that we rock up to the stadium light on Saturday morning, and come 11 or half 11 when the team sheet drops in, that Puerta's back in the side. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. But equally, I wouldn't be surprised if it was, Matarzo, Slater, and Alzate, or Slater, Alzate, and Crooks. I just think it's easy in these situations to go, he's not being played because we need to pay some money. They're nowhere near that yet. If it was, if he'd got to play one more game, and we've seen that at other clubs in the past, that players have got to play one more game and there's an obligation to buy, or they have to pay a certain amount of money. That isn't the case with Puerta. He's nowhere near that figure yet. So I don't know. That's my understanding. You can, fans listening to this, watching this, can take it or leave it. And other colleagues in the media are the same. We're given information. I've done some digging. I've spoken to a lot of different people, and they say it's not finance related. There we go.
Well, if Ruben Sellers genuinely thought Puerta would make enough of a difference, to be the difference between getting a point or 3 points, or if he genuinely thought, I want to play this guy, he's going to make a huge difference, you would like to think logically he would play him, because the cost of relegation is more expensive than the cost of paying a fee for Puerta. That's more going down, be more costly than having to pay a bit of money for Puerta at the end of the season if they stay up. So you would like to think logically, if Ruben Sellers genuinely thinks, he's my best midfielder, or is one of the best players, he needs to be in the team, that he would just play him, because that staying up with, playing your best players and staying up is far more important than worrying about a fee at the end of the season. So yeah, you would like to think that would be the case, surely. I'd be very, very surprised if Ruben Sellers was sat there going, I can't play one of my best players because we might have to pay some money. And I'd be surprised if the owner thought like that as well, because he'll know more than as much as anyone the cost of relegation and what that could mean, especially with the money that they've kind of spent in the last few years, and the money and the players they've brought in January as well. So you'd like to think that the logic would be strong on that one.
Well, relegation, and we've said this before, would be catastrophic. Ultimately, when you're a club losing £500,000 a week in the Championship, relegation to League One would be just, I dread to think what impact that would have on the football side, and also, more importantly, in many ways, the people behind the scenes that don't earn footballer salaries and don't have the ability just to go to another club and go, okay, well, I'll be all right, because I'll go and play somewhere else. Relegation for this football club would be an absolute disaster, and I would worry. I dread to think what it would look like if this club got relegated. And as you say, relegation would cost the club more than paying a bit to Leverkusen for Gustavo Puerta. But equally, what I would say, Tim Walter wasn't that keen in the summer. Tim Walter wasn't, he wasn't falling over himself to play Gustavo Puerta. He wanted to, he liked him, he rated him, but he felt he was a young player, inconsistent, and needed time to adapt to the Championship. So, I just don't get the clamour. I like Gustavo. I think he's a really talented boy. I think he's got a lot to offer. I think he's going to have a great future. But you need different types of players, and I just don't get. I'm not getting the clamour for him. He's got to come back in. He's got to come back in, and he will at some point. He will come back into the team. He will, because he's a good player. But I just don't personally, and it's just an opinion. I just don't get the clamour that he's got to be brought back in, and also where do you bring him in? Because they've got fans want Matarzo in the team. There'll be a lot of fans that want Crooks in the team now. Particularly now he scored a couple of goals. They've got. You wouldn't. I can't imagine too many fans wanting to drop Alzate. So and this was, I suppose, to coin one of Prutz's favourite phrases in the entire world. This dovetails nicely into a question I wanted to ask you about what is your best 11 when Burns, Hughes, and Casey Palmer are available. What is that best 11? Because I think it's a really difficult question. And personally, for me, Puerta isn't in my best 11.
No, I think I was kind of saying this to you earlier. I think Burns would probably be in mine. I know he's not played that much football, and maybe I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but I think if I don't constantly go back to that Sheffield United game, I know it was sort of a little bit of a one-off, but he'd been in the team. He was in the team that game. He's in the team at Millwall when they kept a clean sheet. He was in the team when we were keeping clean sheets, for that very brief period where we seemed to be keeping them a bit more regularly, and especially away from home. And since he's gone off injured against Sheffield United, I do think the defence has looked weaker. Now, obviously, you've got John Egan having come in, and he's coming into a new team and trying to settle, which isn't easy. And that defence then just has been unsettled again. But I think based off the fact of when Burns has played, we've looked a lot more calm defensively, and the results kind of back it up, I think he'd probably be in mine. It's then, I suppose, probably whether you play a back 5 or a back 4, because I think Alfie Jones would still be in my best 11, but I'd quite like to have Charlie Hughes in it as well. So maybe that's where I'd have the back 5. Again, Louis Coyle at right back, and obviously Pandora is in goal. So if I did a back 5, I don't think you could have McLaughlin as a left wing back, really, just for the pace, which would then mean you've got to have Cody Drame, and I'm not 100% sure I would put him in my best 11. This is where it becomes problematic. It's actually a lot harder than you think being a football manager.
It's really impossible.
I think
stuff off the field as well.
I think, to be honest, I think maybe I would have to just keep it as a back 4 and have McLaughlin there, and with the proviso that if it was playing a back 5, you probably would have John Egan in it. But because it's untried and untested, I think I'd have to just stick with the back 4. And then Alzate, as I kind of said, is probably one of the first names on the team sheet. So it's tricky, isn't it? I think I probably would have Slater in. I think I would have Slater in because I think he offers. You've got Alzate there to sort of sit and spray the ball around. You need Slater's energy, I think, to get up and down the pitch. Yeah. And then it's whether you've got Crooks in there for maybe someone to pop up with a goal, or whether you have maybe someone who's a little bit more creative on the ball in Matazo. Maybe for championship experience, I'd go with Crooks potentially.
And the ability to score a goal as well.
And yeah, he can pop it. He knows where the goal is. Especially when you go into like a Sunderland away, you kind of maybe want someone with Matt Crooks' experience to play in there. So that would probably be the midfield 3. And then I think the front 3 is a difficult one, isn't it? Because again, like, people change in and out. I mean, if Kamara had been a bit more consistent, I would have had him in, but I think since he's unfortunately kind of what we wanted him to do, which was kind of kick on after those 2 goals against Leeds, he's just not quite managed it, unfortunately, which has been a shame. Not saying that he can't still cause problems, but I just don't think he's been quite consistent enough. I thought Gelhardt's been good since he's come in. Again, maybe not always scoring or whatever, but he is kind of involved a lot in the play. I think you have to have João Pedro as the striker, given that he's, if you take his goals out of the team, we'd probably be, further down in the bottom 3. Can I bring Bellumi back from his ACL?
Miller, come back, Liam. Can we just have Miller and Bellumi on like one leg?
But you're saying it's difficult to pick a best 11, and sometimes I think it changes depending on the opponents, but even then, I'm going through it and I'm thinking, well, they're inconsistent, and sometimes they're better than they are, and it is difficult when you've got a team of players that some weeks they're really good and then other weeks they let themselves down. It's quite difficult. And like I say, I think Louis Coyle was brilliant last season. I think probably his best season, maybe the League One season was his overall best season, but I thought last season was his best championship season. He's not been quite as good this season, maybe a few more mistakes in his game, but I do think that potentially wasn't helped by the start of the season with the manager and the changeover and everything being unsettled. But you would still have him nailed on as the first choice right back. So it's difficult.
I do think fullbacks is an area. This is not one for today, but I do think fullbacks is an area they need to really work hard on during the summer. I actually think when you look at the options they've got, the squad they've got, and to throw in that you've got Miller and Bellumi coming back, back end of pre-season, there's a lot to like about potentially the team for next season if they can just find a way to muddle through and scrap and scrape and survive. With the basis of the squad they've got, with a full pre-season, with some smart recruitment in 1 or 2 key areas. Goalkeeper, I think, needs some work. I think fullback will need work, and obviously up the top of the pitch, because that's where your destiny is, resolved. And that they've not solved that for quite a while now. They've not been able to go and get a striker that scores regularly. But we'll part of that for another day. I think it's really difficult. I've scribbled down various teams, and I can't get one that I'm happy with. Because because of the midfield, I can't, in the number 10, that kind of number 10 role, is he 8 to 10 as he likes it? Is it Palmer when he's fit? Is it Crooks? There's so many, I thought Louis Barry looked bright first half on Saturday, but ran out of gas, and that's why he was taken off early in the second half. It's worth remembering that he went back to Villa from Stockport, having played brilliantly in League One with an injury. That's why the move was done later in the window. He's obviously finding his feet in the Championship, but I thought he looked bright before he ran out of gas. As you say, I agree with about Abu, but Abu was they paid a good amount of money for Abu from Norwich, but he was signed as a player to build with, to progress, and to be given kind of the space and the freedom to progress with City, but with Miller and Bellumi signed as your frontline wingers. Obviously, because of what's happened with those two, the expectation has become on Kamara to basically provide everything, to provide goals, assists, and be the creator in a team that don't create anything or didn't create very little. So I think it's really hard. Alzate, I think, is the one is your first pick in midfield, but then you've got you can make a case for Mitazo, for Slater, for Gustavo Puerta. I think Gauhart is probably a fair pick. I thought he was not great at Burnley, but I thought he was brilliant in spells against Norwich, and was really lucky not to get a goal. And his pass obviously played a big part in the goal that City did score. So, I think they have got. There's no two ways about it. They've got options, and I don't buy this theory that we're trying to pull the wool over some fans' eyes about the quality of the squad. I look at that. I genuinely believe this, and again, it's just an opinion. I look at their best couple of 11s, and for me, pound for pound on paper, it's better than the teams around them. That doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't guarantee you're going to survive. It doesn't guarantee you're going to go and win 5 in a row and finish 13th. They could still get relegated. There's a very realistic chance that Hull City get relegated because there's 14 games to go and they're only outside the bottom 3 by a point, and they haven't won. They've won 2 at home all season. So, the stats back up on that there's a fair chance. But on paper, Kathryn, they've got a better side and better options in their squad than teams around them, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think after January, I felt a little bit more confident with the players that they signed, and now the options that they had, I kind of was thinking, we should be all right. But I think that was maybe a slightly too optimistic, because I think once you're in that relegation battle, it's difficult to build. You can't just kind of flick a switch and then suddenly go. It's very, very difficult to do that. I know some teams have done it in the past, but to suddenly then, because suddenly you're consistent and you're winning every week, you get stuck in old habits when you've been down at the bottom. Like it's very difficult to kind of break them. And so I do think a lot of it is a psychological, mental battle as well, from the fact that if you've been so inconsistent all season, and you might have games where you go ahead, but you might not get that second goal, and that's been a problem all season. And then you might let a goal in late on, or you might let 2 goals in late on. If you've been doing that all season, it's very difficult to just suddenly stop doing it. Despite the fact that you change the personnel and you change the manager, you get stuck in those habits and that rut. And like we say, we've never had a period throughout the season. Ironically, you have to go back, apart from that Tim Volta where they won those 3 games in a row, even when they've had big wins under Sellers, they've then not backed it up enough. And I'm hoping and waiting for that moment where they win a game and then they go and win the next 2 or 3. But we've just not seen it yet. And you look at all the teams down the bottom; they've all changed the managers. Luton, Plymouth, Derby now, Cardiff. Everyone's chopped and changed. So everyone's kind of in a similar boat, and it's just about who's up for the scrap more, but who's going to kind of take control of their own fate a little bit and not sort of be relying on other teams doing them favours.
Yeah, and I know there's 1 or 2 people on that constantly hammer us for driving the Sellers narrative and saying fantastic and he's this and he's that, and actually his points ratio compared to Walter is very similar. Well, I don't think it's as black and white as that. It's always more difficult for a manager that inherits a squad low on confidence, not used to winning, and all sorts of problems mid-season. It's not. I don't think it's that straightforward. You can just compare. Well, actually, Ruben Sayers has got extra points, and Tim Walter they basically got the same. So Sayers is doing no better than what Walter did. I just don't think that's a fair. It's nothing to do with narratives or pushing one. He's better than him. That's nothing. That's not what we're doing. I just don't personally think that's a fair comparison, because the former manager had his way of working. He had a very difficult summer, and we've never shied away from that. He was let down by recruitment, but it just didn't work. And then you bring a manager in mid-season when he takes on a team that have got so many injuries. He takes on a team that are completely devoid of confidence, playing in a style that the players weren't comfortable with. And that's not the media driving the narrative. Speak to the players themselves. The players themselves have spoken about this. That's not us driving a particular agenda. That's just their opinion, and they were living this day to day. So, but anyway, it is ultimately who blinks first and who can find that little bit of consistency. Like we've seen, Portsmouth have got a couple of wins. They're starting to pull away. I don't think, Kathryn, Oxford. It might look if you look at the table now, you might look at Oxford on 38 and Swansea on 37, thinking 8 points ahead of City. Oxford, they're cut and dry. I don't think they are. I think they had that massive reaction when Rowett went in. They won a flurry of games. Results have started to dip again. And actually, and I know, again, we're talking on paper, so it's obviously a lot easier. City are 8 points behind Oxford as we stand. They have a game in hand. Admittedly, that's at Cardiff. Huge game. They also play Oxford in 3 weeks. That if they get 2 wins, that cuts that gap to 2 points. Swansea are in all sorts of kind of trouble. Lots of talk about the ownership, the manager. They've had a couple of massive wins last weekend at Bristol City, but then they lose this weekend. They're not quite out of it yet. Obviously, we've got a game in hand on Swansea. We go to Swansea in mid-April, or I think it's Good Friday. There's so much that can chop and change, and I know with 14 games to go, time is running out, but so much can change. Teams that you think are home and hosed, Oxford and Swansea, could suddenly, with a couple of wins for the teams below them, get reeled back in, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember seeing kind of Oxford and thinking, where are they going? Come back. And same with kind of Portsmouth. They built up a little bit of a gap because they won a few games in a row, but everyone's very much still in it. And if City go and win 2 or 3 games in a row, suddenly, they might be kind of back up to, in contention with the likes of Oxford. But it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, Derby bringing John Eustace in, I think everyone kind of thought, wow, that's kind of like he's almost like a guarantee he's going to get them out of it because of his experience, and they're going to be all right. But as we saw, first game, when people always talk about that new manager bounce, they get beat 4-0. And all right, he's not had much time to go in there, and then he might end up getting them out of trouble. But it's very difficult to just go in and suddenly flick a switch and right, we're going to start winning now. It doesn't work like that. And I always go back to, I remember Hull City's first season in the Premier League, and we were very much in like a relegation battle, and it was us and Newcastle. And Newcastle brought Alan Shearer in as like the manager at the end of I can't remember how many games were to go, but there wasn't long left. But it was very much between us and them. And I remember thinking at the time, well, that's it. Newcastle will be safe now because they've brought Alan Shearer in, and it's Alan Shearer, and he'll just go in and flick a switch and everything will be all right. Granted, he didn't have much management experience, but he wasn't able to just go in and like, right, okay, I've changed everything and now we're going to be all right. Sometimes it does work like that, but quite often it's very, very difficult to do that. And that's the thing when I say all the teams down the bottom have changed their manager at some point, and they're all still down the bottom. They're still in a relegation battle. They're not now suddenly competing for the playoffs. So I think it is going to be, unfortunately, a very long second half of the season for every team down there, and it might go quite close to the end of the season. And hopefully I'm wrong, and hopefully City will win the next 5-6 games in a row, and suddenly we'll be waving goodbye to the teams down the bottom, and we'll be sat comfortably in mid-table. But as you say, I still think the likes of Swansea and Oxford are very much in there with us and are not quite, home and dry, as despite what you might think of when you look at the table.
And these teams are down there for a reason, because they're not on the day. These teams have got the ability, because they can beat anybody on their day. The difficulty of these teams is doing it consistently, and that's why you look at the squads of some teams at the bottom end of the table compared with the teams at the top. There's probably not that much difference between them. I'm taking out obviously the top 3 or 4 who've got very, very good squads. Everybody else is much of a muchness. It's just who can do it on a consistent basis, who can go 6-7 games unbeaten 4 wins, 3 draws. We saw it with QPR, bottom of the table in October, go and win unbeaten in 13. I know they then had a couple of dodgy results, but they trounced Derby. Again, you look at Derby's squad. Derby's squad is nowhere near the level of Hull City, but it doesn't. That's all on paper, and the games are not won on paper. But City, and ultimately, we want City to go and win two of the next 4 games. They've shown all season that they're not capable. That group of players, even with additions, haven't been capable of doing it. You do hope that as the new players start to get more familiar with the group and settled, that they can find some consistency. Just quickly before we go, because I know we're now into the hour. So they've got 6 games now before the international break. Away at Sunderland Saturday, early kickoff. Then away at Cardiff next Tuesday. Then they've got a bit of a break before they then play Plymouth at home, the rearranged game on the 4th of March. Away at Bristol City, at home to Oxford, and then away at West Brom. International break, and the first game back, Luton at home. So they've got 4 games in the next couple of weeks, and obviously we get to the end of March, towards the end of March, and there's the 2-week break. Those 6 games, when you factor in Cardiff and Plymouth and Oxford, picking out those 3 specifically, massive in the context of the picture at the bottom end of the table.
Yeah, huge. And I think that's where you want the players to stand up and really take control of it and not be kind of overawed by the pressure. Because this is the thing, like the players will know those are the big games and those are the games they've got to win. You've just got to hope they don't feel that pressure too much. And that the fans sometimes don't feel that pressure too much. Sometimes I think you go into those games at home. It can be the same if you're going for promotion. I remember when we were going from promotion to Steve Bruce and we played Watford at home and it felt like a really big game and then we ended up losing it. You just hope that doesn't kind of play into the players' kind of minds and supporters don't kind of start getting jittery as well if they're at the game and things maybe aren't going well. Because everyone kind of knows it's the classic sort of 6-pointer games, but you can't get away from the fact they are massive. And that's where you want the players to sort of stand up and take control of it themselves and get themselves out of the trouble. Yeah. And yeah, it's going to be a nerve-wracking few weeks, I think, when we have that running.
Absolutely. Kathryn, brilliant. Thanks so much for your time today. Everybody else, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. 3 points on Saturday, do you think?
I hope so, Baz. I mean, it's a type of game where we think probably won't get anything at Sunderland away. Sort of thought that about Sheffield United, and then sometimes they just turn up, don't they? So hopefully it's another. Last season, I remember we won a bit of a bad run and we went to Sunderland away and won. So maybe we do the same again. Yeah,
10 wins. They've got the 3rd best home record in the league. 10 wins from 16. They've not lost yet. Sunderland 10 wins. 16.
Why are you saying that?
Because Sheffield United haven't lost at home. There you go. See, Sheffield United.
Okay, there you go. I'll let you off.
Before we went there and we won 3-0. So, using that logic, up the Tigers. Right. Thanks, Kathryn. We will see you again soon.